Commence primary ignition.
I'm just not the hero type, clearly.
What a piece of junk.
Enterprise, this is the captain.
I got a bad feeling about this.
It's all part of the plan.
Engage.
Welcome back to Podcast 2 for 1. I'm your host, Donovan Thompson, with my co-host,
Daniel Wingfield.
and today we are back again with Dr. Bruce Hutchinson to talk The Fifth Element. Dr. Bruce Hutchinson?
Glad to be here as always.
It is episode 119 of Podcast 2 for 1, and if you haven't, let's be honest, you probably haven't, hit that subscribe button and notification bell. That way you're up to date on all future episodes of Podcast 2 for 1, as well as the cool content we have at 2 for 1 Studios. We also have 2 for 1 Joe live every Monday at 9 a.m. Central. There we talk about movie, nerdy news, and TV news of the week. And of course, if you didn't know, and again, just like before, you probably didn't know, we are sponsored by Kapow Comics, located at 4047 East Kill Avenue in Sherwood, Arkansas. There they have comic books, collectibles, graphic novels, and of course, special guest appearances throughout the year. I like when everybody on now, they know they got to do it when I say, it's like a thing now.
Yeah.
Okay, episode 119, boys. We're almost halfway to the coveted 241, so we're getting closer and closer. We're getting closer and closer. But we're here to talk The Fifth Element. And I would love everyone's thoughts on this movie, starting with Daniel. And then we'll work around to Bruce last. Daniel, what's your thoughts?
Sure.
Well, I want to set this up a little bit before
Please,
we just go straight to the thoughts.
Sure.
Because this was my suggestion, I just want to set it up a little bit. When it was sort of my turn to suggest a movie, I thought it would be fun to do an action movie directed and made outside of Hollywood. And so the two suggestions I had was The Fifth Element and Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. I do want to just point out before we hear what Donovan and Daniel thought that you guys chose The Fifth Element and not Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Right.
So I just want to say that first of all. Second of all, it's the 25th anniversary this year of The Fifth Element, and so it is kind of showing up in social media and stuff like that. So I do think it is a good, appropriate choice. So there we go.
And let's be honest, The Fifth Element is a better podcast discussion movie, probably, than Crouching Tiger.
So.
Like Crouching Tiger, you know what? If we're in film school, great. Let's analyze the frames and the camera movements and stuff. But in terms of just content, you know what I mean? Like evocative content, The Fifth Element has that in spades because there's a lot to talk about. I will say that.
Yeah.
I had never seen this movie. I literally watched it today, and I think like the only touch points I even had for it were like I'd obviously seen Mila Jovovich and her hair, like the pink hair in like screenshots before, and then Chris Tucker's character I think is like referenced in a lot of things. But man, this movie, it's tonally all over the place. I often don't know what exact kind of movie it's going for. The performances are all over the place. And the plot is all over the place. So this movie is doing a lot. I think some of the things it's doing are pretty interesting and cool, and then other things are very tropey and I guess uninteresting in some of the ways it does. But overall, I would say I didn't hate the movie, but it's definitely not one that I am looking to watch again anytime soon. And it's probably not one I would recommend to anyone just for like their viewing pleasure, if you know what I mean. But there's a lot in it. It's definitely got some interesting things to talk about.
Yeah, let me read you the post I put on Facebook before I started this podcast. I said, and I quote, "Spoilers on my thoughts. Unfriend me now if you like this movie." That's what I said. It's a movie. Look, it's fine. I would say this. There's things about it that I do enjoy about it, but kind of like Daniel, my first time I watched it was a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and I rewatched it again today. And I love Bruce Willis, and I love Bruce Willis, period. And so there is a lot I can still see in the movie that he brings to the table that I'm like, oh, there's hints of characters from Last Boy Scout or John McClane from Die Hard, or Striking Distance or whatever. So like all these little things like I can pull from, and I enjoy that. It's just not my kind of movie ultimately, mainly because it doesn't do enough of the things that I like about 80s, 90s action movies. And also, like, there's just a lot of, kind of like what Daniel said, a lot of tonal shifts, especially with the humor, a lot of slapsticky kind of stuff. Um, I'll say this, it's not my least favorite Bruce Willis movie. That honor goes to Mercury Rising. And I will not watch that movie ever again, but I would watch this before that one. So I'm excited to kind of dive deeper into it. Again, there's things I like about it, but overall, it kind of missed the mark for me, I think. Bruce?
I am a huge fan of The Fifth Element. I must have watched this movie a dozen times.
Wow.
I think it's fantastic. And I think I like it for all the reasons that you guys seem to not like it. It's not a typical Hollywood sci-fi action movie. It's crazy. It's unpredictable. It's over the top. Its design is colorful and bizarre. It's funny, but sometimes it's not funny, and that's also kind of funny. Just in terms of the fact that it's happy to be crazy and zany, which I don't think we see in. I mean, I wouldn't call this serious science fiction, but in a way, it kind of is serious science fiction. You know what I mean? That is, it's not like Galaxy Quest or something that's just purely satire.
Parody.
Or parody, but so it works on a basic level with serious sci-fi tropes, but it's willing to just have all kinds of crazy fun with them, be completely ridiculous at times, laugh at those tropes, yet at the same time kind of take them seriously. And for me, it's a fun world to be in. Is the plot some kind of, super tight, awesome, amazing plot? Of course not. But I don't think it's meant to be. And I wouldn't say that this is a movie that is trying to have a really tight plot and misses the mark. It's a movie that is purposefully kind of not worrying about filling in holes and just sort of jumping from one thing to another and doing that in a fun way because it knows that the tropes and that you'll be able to follow them. You know what I mean? Because this is all familiar territory in terms of the basic plot, right? You've seen this movie before. You just haven't seen it with these costumes and with these details and with these touches and all of that kind of stuff. So that's why I like it so much.
No, I mean, I'll say this. There's a lot of movies that I grew up with that I know that are not considered high cinema or good movies or whatever,
Right.
but because I saw them at a young age, they've imprinted on my brain. Like one I think of, which I would argue it's high cinema, but like The Last Dragon, so to speak, right? Like I know if I showed someone now, like Daniel, he might be like, "What the fuck did I just watch?" You know? But like because I
Right.
saw it at a young age and whatever, it really hit me in a different way. I think that the watching it now, especially having gone through film school, and then also it's like I'm in it late 20s, right? Watching this movie, I feel like it doesn't do one single thing for me like in an amazing way. Like if it had some great action tropes in it, and there's like one or two, I was like, okay, I dig that. Then like if it had those like one-liners that were really good or those action sequences that were really good, like okay, I like that. Or if the humor was just like really funny at parts, I would like that. Or if I just felt something for these characters, which I never really do feel anything for these characters. Um, I feel like if it had one element going for it that was like outstanding versus the rest, and I think I could get into it. I will say I do love that it's colorful, and I do love that it's this. I mean, like it has some pretty decent visual effects for it, especially for whatever it came out 90. I don't know, 97,
7.
98. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's got some cool stuff like that. And I don't know. I think that if we dive a little deeper into it, some of my other issues will kind of come to light. But I love that you love it. I wish I did love it so we could love it together. But unfortunately, I don't on this one. Um, let's dive into it. So actually, I want Bruce. Will you tee up the beginning here? I want tee up like the opening, this opening
Yeah, yeah.
scene here, and kind of tell us, what you got from it and kind of what it sets up for the universe.
Yeah, so first of all, I'll start by saying, and I think this is interesting too. For me, this movie worked out as sequences rather than acts. So I had actually this movie has 10 sequences, which I think for a movie from the 90s is a little ahead of its time. I don't think we see a lot of sequence structure movies popularly until the last 10 to 15 years. So to see that 25 years ago, I think is kind of interesting. But yeah, our first sequence is basically a prologue, right? And there are some weird things about this movie for sure that we'll see as we start talking about it. But we meet this, priest of some kind. I don't remember his name, but he's being assisted by Luke Perry, playing this character of Billy, and they're waiting for this long-awaited arrival of these aliens, whose temple they are sort of investigating, guarding. Well, I guess Billy works for the archaeologist, and then we've also got this priest who sort of whatever runs the temple or is the caretaker for the temple. And then our aliens come down, and they're sort of supposed to be our allies and protectors and stuff, but things go a little wrong, and Luke Perry's character freaks out and starts shooting at the aliens, and the one alien gets sort of crushed in this room, and the other aliens take off, but they're left with a key, knowing that when they need them, the aliens are going to presumably reappear to help them out. And now this priest becomes the caretaker of the knowledge of these aliens, right? So very much set in kind of an Egyptian style feeling at the beginning.
Very Stargate. It kind of reminded me a lot of Stargate
Yes.
in the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which had come out not too. I think was that pre-Independence Day. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was after. But yeah,
I was thinking about Stargate too. Yeah, go ahead.
I've got some issues. One thing I did like about it was that I liked how there was some information kind of dollied out with their interactions with the aliens that kind of that you didn't know in the beginning of their arrival. They're friendly. There's that guy who's trying to poison our main archaeologist. I can't even say it, I guess.
Right.
But they were trying to poison him, and it's very slapsticky again. He's trying to, just take a drink, it's all I need from you is take a drink. But I thought why did they ever explain, and maybe I just missed it, why they took out the stones in the fifth element, so to speak? Did they explain that?
I think it's just a MacGuffin kind of setup for what the main plot is in the future. Because no, I don't think they did. And I think for me, it was it's a pretty clunky opening. Just in terms of you got a guy just standing at this glyph and being let me just explain to you the 4 elements, and then they all come together to this fifth element that's in the shape of a human. You know what I mean? It's very just kind of on the nose exposition, I guess, a little bit for me. I did think the aliens were really coolly designed. I liked their turtle mech things.
You did?
And I think
they were cool.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I think, when you first see their feet shuffling, it looks a little animatronic a bit, but by the time, I think once they're doing stuff, and I think that's where this movie has some of its biggest strengths, is I think the design, not as a whole, I think as a whole, the design is all very unique. It's got it's like someone had a pretty specific idea for what they wanted to do. Sometimes I feel like it's just being weird for the sake of being weird, and that's the part where I'm like, okay, that's not working for me. But for the most part, like the aliens and like what we'll talk about later, I thought that was like where the movie showed just some color, so to speak, in terms of just presenting something that I guess I'm not used to seeing in other places the same way. But yeah, it was a clunky-esque opening for me, and a little slow, I guess, too. Like it was a pretty long opening sequence by the time we get to the future. But yeah,
There is something interesting about the creature designs for sure, but I kept thinking like, whatever planet these guys are from, they cannot have any natural disasters because they're fucked as a species. Because they just like he's wobbling like because the door's
yeah,
closing
they had
really
very little
slowly.
mobility.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of wild.
Yeah, it's all up here, It's all about their brains and technology. I love the design, and that's one of my favorite parts of this whole movie is the design of everything. The aliens, the costumes, the settings, all the colors, we'll get into. And I get that some of them, they don't feel sleek that in the way that we associate with science fiction and with the future, which is part of why I like it. Because again, I don't think you could find another science fiction movie that has a look like this. It's completely original, to me. And just to mention right up front, I was sort of alluding to this in the sound test. All the costumes are designed by Jean-Paul Gaultier, who is like one of the main fashion designers of the last 50 years. And so they're unique, they're interesting, they're a little all over the place, and I love the aliens. I think especially these particular aliens, because the other aliens, the bad aliens, are a little more standard, even though they're a little on the comic side. They're based in a sort of a kind of reptilian, ugly looking type alien. But you don't see aliens that look like turtles, right? You don't see, wobbly turtle-looking aliens with big like flashlights on their chest or whatever. So yeah, I like the design. I will agree with you guys, though. I'm not. Whenever I go to watch this movie, I just want to get to the present day, right? I want to get through that opening section, partly because it's so drab compared to the rest of it. It's sort of typical brown sort of Egyptian, it's something I've already seen before, and none of our main characters are in it. In fact, all of those characters are dead, right? Because it's 300 years later. So I don't disagree with you. Although I don't find the exposition any more or less clunky than most science fiction movies.
No,
In fact,
don't either.
I was mentioning that, we were talking about Top Gun before we got started, and even back in the early 80s, we had the sort of scene where one character goes into the other, and then the character is like, so I can't believe that I'm dealing with this guy who, and then he spends the next 10 minutes like telling us every bit of his history, right? Reading it out of a folder. So, doing the same thing, reading it off of a wall, to me, isn't too much worse. But overall, I agree. It's not the best beginning 10 minutes of a movie.
Even in your defense, whatever, Top Gun Maverick, it does a lot of that too. Actually, the old school.
It's still happening. It's still happening.
But they do
Oh,
it
yeah.
in a way that I find more satisfying, like compared to the original Top Gun, I should say.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I look forward to you watching that because I want to hear your thoughts on it. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think I saw Daniel Twitch, and I think me and him were thinking the same thing earlier. I mean, the best example of like non-sleek sci-fi is a little small indie project called Star Wars. And Star Wars that also has this like non-sleek, kind of drab, kind of alien architecture, that kind of thing. Dirty. It's nothing's clean. They do a great job of it, and I feel like just even those aliens, and granted there's different species, I get it. Those aliens in contrast to like these reptilian aliens, those guys remind me more of like Last Starfighter, almost Star Trek kind of aliens. And then you get like the opera singer in the last third of the movie, and she feels kind of like she's almost like a Star Wars character.
Just like a Twilight.
Exactly. And it feels like I feel like it does. These things do kind of clash a little bit, and I get it. It's a big universe, but
Yeah, and
I feel it a little bit.
I think for me, it's that does stuff doesn't bother me as much. I think some of it just feels like, because there's so much world building, and I think that's what this movie does really cool is it builds this really interesting world. Just some of the things don't feel consistent within the world. Like it doesn't seems like it always feels like sometimes it feels like, oh, this is a really cool world, and then other times we fly to another planet and there's a Hawaiian theme and then opera. You know what I mean? And it's like, well, this doesn't feel very alien. It just feels like an opera concert in Hawaii. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, what you know what I'm saying? Or like,
Sure.
You walk into the ship and this like guy in the driver room is wearing like a little sailor boy outfit or something. You're like, what? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I
And
know,
then
but see,
for me, I think
yeah,
the worst degree, like the policeman uniforms are the most unpractical things. Like you cannot make an argument for why that is helpful for anything that they do in the film. Like they're trying to like squeeze through grates with like cone head attachments and like, you know what I mean? It's just that part of it is where it just kind of it starts to feel more silly than it is like taking itself
but it is.
serious as much.
It is silly. I mean, I don't disagree. I mean, I think we are supposed to see the humor in some of those outfits and some of those costumes. A lot of the costumes aren't practical, right? I mean, the flight attendants, are wearing these crazy tops with with no bottoms to the boobs, right? I mean, the outfits are ridiculous, but I think that the whole idea is that this is a world or a universe, maybe not a universe, but certainly Earth and the things connected to Earth, are existing on kind of a ridiculous level. I mean, I think that's part of the idea. I mean, even not just the costumes, but even some of the people. I mean, the general who shows up in the next sequence that we're about to talk about, the president. I mean, these are not intelligent people, and I think the movie knows that. And I'll also just argue quickly in defense of the sailor boy outfits and stuff like that. It is a big universe, and I think we're supposed to be able to see all these aliens and stuff. But where they go to is Floston Paradise, and it's a floating cruise ship that flies around a spaceship. You know what I mean? So there's this idea, I think, that even though it's high technology, nothing's that original. You know what I mean? Like the future still just has a cruise ship with an evening show where people wear tuxedos, and I mean, in this case, it's an opera singer. But if you've been on a cruise ship, every night there's some show that's people get slightly dressed up for, and it's sort of like some things don't change. So to me, that's all part of. I'm not saying there's all kinds of social commentary, but I think that is its view of the world is that the future is kind of dumb, a little unoriginal, but also has some cool stuff in it. Like that's how I see that world. But I can see why you would see it differently.
I see what you're saying. I guess it didn't connect for me that the movie was self-aware of this and presenting this in like a self-aware way. Like for me, it more felt like they really thought this was cool, or like that like. I see what you're saying, and I agree.
You did see Gary Oldman, right? You did see like Gary Oldman's costume and the way Gary Oldman inhabits that costume. I mean,
you're right, and that is probably the best evidence you have for your point of view is Gary Oldman's entire character. And maybe what I would have liked though is maybe just some more like comments from the main character. Maybe like some you have moments in movies like this where the character will make a comment and it's basically a meta comment like to the audience about like what the filmmaker's kind of perspective is on what we're seeing. And maybe that's just a different style or something. But
for me, that's Ruby Rod interviewing Dallas Corbin, right? I mean, because in that sense, Dallas Corbin is playing, and this is what's interesting. I mean, I think there's more to this movie than maybe you're giving it credit for, because Bruce Willis in 1997 is known as an action star, right? And so I think the movie is playing with that some, but it's also playing with Bruce Willis from Moonlighting, right? The zany comic Bruce Willis that we used to know before he was in movies, right? And he's sort of playing both of those characters. He's playing that comic version some of the time. And then, he gets on this cruise ship and Ruby Rod's trying to interview him and he only gives these one-word answers, which are very much more in line with the Die Hard version, right, of a Bruce Willis than the Moonlighting version of a Bruce Willis. So I think there's interesting things that they're playing with what your expectations are from a Bruce Willis character, for example. And then, of course, you've got Gary Oldman, who is 100% over the top, as a character named Zorg. I mean, come on, right?
There's a nice 3-shot zoom in on Zorg Enterprises or whatever it's called. Zorg Inc. I hope it's what it's called. That was kind of like, okay. But I think it's a little, I feel like you might be giving the movie a little too much credit. I mean, the thing about it is, from what I understand, the director was writing this when he was really young. And obviously, he probably, did a lot of rewrites in the last year or two. He made in some rewrites with Bruce Willis on there. But I don't know if I don't know if the filmmakers are being, we're giving you different pieces of Bruce Willis, and that's interesting because of why. I mean, I'd rather have a character that's consistent across the board.
How would we know the difference between that and like uneven directing or uneven performances
or bad editing?
You know what I mean? Like, and I think you could be right, Bruce. I think the hard part for me is that kind of insight kind of feels like trapped in the era that the movie came out in. You know what I'm saying?
Perhaps,
like having this kind of like, this is what he's doing. Because I mean, watching this now, I would have no way of knowing that other than talking to you, like someone that was watching it around then or watching the movies that were coming out before and after. So I guess you could be right. I don't know how to tell the difference, at least in this film.
I think part of it, I mean, and it can happen with any kind of filmmaker, is do you know them and do you trust them, and how do you go into a movie, right? If you go into a movie either suspicious of it or, like, I'm not sure what this is going to be, and, maybe you're not like, you're no sort of waiting for something to go wrong. And I do that a lot with movies. I shouldn't, but I do. And then, if it's not kind of hitting it, then I'm like, okay, maybe this movie doesn't know what it's doing, or maybe this filmmaker doesn't know what it's doing, right? And that can be really tough, especially, when you look at other areas like contemporary art, right? And, I happen to be reading Andy Warhol's biography, and Andy Warhol's a great example of this, right? He paints a Campbell's soup can, and we're all trying to figure out whether to take that seriously or not. Is he self-aware? Is he not self-aware? What the hell is going on, right? So that makes sense to me. I can see where you'd look at this movie and go, I don't know whether it's self-aware. I don't know whether I'm supposed to trust that this director knows what he's doing, right? To me, it's crazy enough and over the top enough that I believe he does know what he's doing, right? Because for one thing, it's got a huge budget, and I'm going, are you really going to call your bad guy Zorg and be serious about it? You know what I mean? So I guess I'm looking at that, and I'm looking at my knowledge of science fiction going, there's no way that I can take this completely seriously. I think he knows what he's doing, right? And that if I think he knows what he's doing, then I see all of that through that lens, and I can laugh at it and understand the commentary. But I get it. If you don't get on board with that, or the movie doesn't get you on board with that, then you may be left constantly confused by, like, is that funny? Is that supposed to be serious? Is that supposed to be funny? How am I supposed to take that, right? And clearly for you guys, I think maybe viewing it through a more contemporary lens, that's a lot harder.
Yeah, and I'll say I think I went into it with a pretty clean slate. I felt pretty unbiased going in to watch it, and I will say I laughed at it a lot, but I never knew if I was laughing with it or at it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And maybe that doesn't completely. Maybe from the filmmaker's perspective, that maybe not doesn't matter. I mean, I was still laughing at the things that I think were funny, and either they were intended to be funny or either way, I guess. Yeah, I see what you're saying, and I think it is also a thing of like, yeah, I'm not hyperly familiar with Luc Besson's work, and maybe some of it too is like a bias of like knowing this is like a French action film, that you know what I mean, and like trying to
It
decipher
is.
like, hey, what are they getting it, or are they just completely missing what really makes good action, or are they just making fun of everything that they see we do over here, kind of thing? And yeah, and I think you're probably right. It probably is something more nuanced than what it first appears. And I think, like what you said, it is kind of maybe a tougher one to look at. 20 years ago, a 20-year-old movie now.
Well, and to be fair, the Luc Besson movies that you probably would know would be kind of more B action movies that in some ways almost feel a little more serious, like Leon the Professional, which was a long time ago, or Lucy, which was a bigger hit more recently for him. You'd the other movie, he went back to this, by the way, 20 years later with the movie Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets, and that movie is. And no, but it's also a very goofy, bizarre science fiction movie that if you're expecting your typical science fiction action, you're going to go like, this movie is horrible. But if you're expecting a Fifth Element, like crazy, bizarre costumes and colors and weirdness, you're going to get that in spades, And so, yeah, I mean, you sort of have to be open to an experience that doesn't quite make any sense for that movie. His science fiction definitely sort of goes off in that weird direction versus his slightly more gritty, sort of down to earth B action kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I can kind of, recalling even some of our discussions from film school, understanding, that a lot of other, other cinema from around the world, does not value plot and character arcs the same way that Hollywood cinema does, right? And so that makes, even looking back on the movie now, it's like, okay, I do see that some consistency, between this movie and, maybe not completely, but like Breathless or something like that is like, it's about the experience that you're going on while viewing the movie as much as like what the movie is about. But I think the hard part is where, the little ways that it tries to kind of mirror Hollywood cinema, like, Bruce Willis is looking for the perfect woman to start the movie. And then after he brings Lilu to the priest, he's like, she's perfect. And, he gets pushed out the door and he goes, perfect. And it's like, it feels like it's trying to make this big, like, kind of circular moment with the plot and character motivations. And then we'll get to the end and how they win later. But it just, when those kind of elements show up, I guess it's like that's where it kind of gets confusing of like, well, are you wanting me to have this kind of like classical Hollywood satisfaction of like, everything coming back around and kind of having this connected layer to all of the plot and the character motivations and all that. And then other times it's like, no, fuck that. You know what I mean?
To be fair, it doesn't do that stuff super well. It's not a great love story, for example, right? I mean, no one's going to go back and watch that in terms of like, oh, I really want to experience the love of Corbin Dallas and Lilu, right? I mean, it's, I'm totally on board with that. I'll also say one other thing, or two things that go together, which I think are fair criticisms. That first 12 minutes does not set us up for all of the stuff that I just said, right? It sets you up for a more serious science fiction movie. And that's part of why I don't think it's a very successful opening, because you think that you're supposed to be taking it one way and then it becomes this crazy, zany something else that you didn't get in the first 12 minutes, right? And the second thing, and to push us forward into the next couple of sequences, is that you barely meet the main character until 30 minutes into the movie. You know, I mean, we do meet him in sequence 2. We're introduced to him 16 minutes in, but we have no conception of what his connection is to the movie until loosely what you'd call like an Act 1 climax or end of sequence 3, where Lilu falls into his cab, right? And it's crazy because that's also like an inciting incident for his character that's happening super late in the movie, and not really getting him plugged into the movie until pretty late. So from any kind of like classical structural point of view, yeah, that is not how you would normally go about telling a story, for sure.
Debo from Friday is the president of this galactic empire or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Just want to point that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, okay.
And not to justify this now, but he's cross-eyed, right? I mean, there's no, you know, I'm not in favor of using the, you know, those kind of things for humor, and obviously we've moved kind of beyond that, but I think that's a sign of like understanding of what the movie is trying to do. Like, the movie is using that physical thing as a sign of his intelligence, which I agree it should not, but he's not supposed to be the smartest, brainiest president anyone's ever seen before, right?
Right.
And I definitely did pick up on that line. I mean, like, any of the government people and the military people, they're big doofuses in this whole movie,
Yeah.
right? Like they're just kind of brick-headed, just some line about like, they're just like, shoot first, ask questions later, kind of like, I think one character literally says that, like,
He does.
I prefer to shoot first or something.
And then
like
immediately gets killed, right? And you just, exactly, yeah.
that. Yeah. And I did feel like that, to me, did feel like intentional irony, or just it kind of felt like a little bit of poking fun at kind of like American military like ism, and like this kind of like superiority complex a little bit that you can find, especially like in cinema. But no, I agree. I think the first sequence really feels more like Stargate, and then we get to the rest of the movie, and it's like nothing like Stargate, which is its own kind of weird thing. Yeah, no, and I think, you know, going back to like kind of the sequences, I guess it is weird that, I guess it does feel like Lilu and Bruce Willis are kind of introduced pretty late for like how much the movie revolves around them. Like, her introduction, I think, was interesting. I thought sometimes her performance felt a little bit too theatrical, a little too over the top or on the nose. But for the most part, I do like her character, and once she gets introduced and we kind of get her with Bruce Willis, I do feel like the movie like finds some momentum that it holds pretty well, and that I was a bit more into, you know, I was a bit more on board and just going along with it by that point. But those first, I guess, 2 or 3 sequences, they're very expository, and they're very we're dealing with a bunch of characters throughout them.
Yes.
It just feels like a lot of characters. So once the movie kind of settles down and we kind of stick with a couple, I think it finds some better footing.
You know, and I think that's where the movie becomes hard to read, because you're looking at it sort of structurally and plot-wise, and the first 30 minutes are a mess. You know, I'm not going to disagree with that, and it's all moving so fast, and like, we get that prologue, and then basically the bad aliens arrive, and the general goes out to confront them and is immediately killed. And then, you know, the movie almost doesn't care. It's like the Brian James character, the general's like, well, I contacted the aliens and explained what happened, and they're, of course, you know, thought it was regrettable that all of their friends were killed, but they're not mad at us, like, you know, and they just paper it over in one line, and it's ridiculous, right, from a plot perspective. I mean, in some ways, in this sense, it kind of reminds me of Hong Kong movies that we used to watch, you know, in our classes, where it's like, if you're trying to judge this by how well it's plotted, you're going, this is a bad movie, right? So then when it's doing some of the other things almost like purposefully bad, it's hard for you to realize that that's what's happening,
Yes.
that
That's exactly
Zorg
right.
is supposed to be a completely ridiculous, over-the-top, funny villain, right? Because you're like, man, this plot has barely made any sense. Why do I trust that, And that's where you're right, Daniel. I think that's where the sort of Frenchness of it and the Europeanness of it come in, where it's not really worrying about plot. It's just going to kind of have fun, but it's still using this plot to sort of have fun with, and so you do end up with, especially I would agree, those first 30 minutes kind of feeling all over the place. And I could definitely see people going like, yeah, I don't get this movie and I'm kind of done, Right, I think, as you said, when it's getting going, when Lilu falls into Corbin's cab.
Hey, Daniel, can you do me a favor and kind of turn up your game
Yeah.
or just speak a little louder or something?
Sure thing.
I'm kind of getting some different levels going on here. Yeah, I mean, look, just kind of touch back earlier. I do think that he is doing some of these things intentionally and on purpose. I mean, I think just it's evident by watching the movie and just
Yes.
even some of the slapsticky like two shots and the way they kind of freeze on characters and they just almost like they're constantly looking at the camera. Absolutely, they're doing some of this stuff intentionally on purpose. And I kind of kept catching myself as I was watching the movie, like saying like, man, I wonder how many takes he had the actors do to get
Yeah.
them to a more excited kind of theatrical place, because I feel like their normal inclination was not to be that over dramatic. Like just even like the guy at the where she does like the multi-pass thing, right? And like the fake guy
Yeah.
is trying to play Davis, and like the way he's reacting and shaking and just being nervous and stuff. I'm like, there's no
Yeah.
way that guy walked in on set and then did that the first take. Like he had to be like prepped for that, like through a few takes, whatever, because like that's just like not a normal thing for I would think any actor do. Now that's not always the case. Some are going to come in there and just do that, but I think it is intentional. I just think that all the other things around it kind of hurt it for me. And like let's kind of get into it. So Debo, Mr. President, right? I think a big problem with this movie. Yes, we are introduced with Bruce Willis and Mia Jovovich pretty late on when she falls into the cab. But I have a big problem overall with this, with like the antagonist of the movie, right? So like really the antagonist, the ultimate antagonist is this big black ball of sun, right?
Yeah.
And it's hard to connect to that. It's hard to feel like what its motivations are. And again, it's a sci-fi movie. It's there's tons of movies that I love that it's just good versus evil. I get that. But I wish there would have been a stronger connection with that big ball of matter and Gary Oldman's character. We did have a conversation with them, which you kind of wonder they're having a phone call.
But it makes no sense. Let's just be honest. Like Gary Oldman's like reasoning for like helping the black ball of death. It's like one of those times where it's like that sounded poetic, but it does not make any logical sense. So
I didn't hate that at first. I think to me it's more evident later that he's probably more doing this because he wants to live versus I assume he's probably feel like he struck up some type of deal because like he is bleeding from his skull whenever he's having this phone
Sure.
call with him. So I feel like he was more
that was
more
some
showboating and trying
brownish-
to like justify. Yeah.
Sorry, that
Yeah.
blood, it didn't look like blood in that scene. Like I remember when I was like, is this supposed to be like hair dye? Because it looks like almost like really brown. The
Right.
blood, like
Yeah, it's
maybe-
inexplicable. It is inexplicable. But I don't know. I'm a little surprised, Donovan, about your criticism about the bad guy because
Right.
if anything, to me, this just predicted the next 20 years of comic book cinema in which
Yeah.
there is some
I knew that
crazy
was
dark force alien who wants to destroy the universe for no good reason.
And here's the difference, Bruce. That would that totally is okay and fine. Marvel has a villain problem, but it's okay because their characters actually go through a journey in the movie. Like Captain America, Iron Man, Thor, they all learn something in their movies. Bruce Willis's character doesn't learn jack shit in this
Oh,
movie.
of course not. And
Well,
that's not what this movie is trying to do, for sure.
But
For
that's what I'm
sure.
saying. That's one.
Yeah.
We talked about this in Infinity War. Like, there's a give and take there. It's okay to have a plot hole if Thor's doing something really fucking badass. It's okay to have bad villains if you care about the characters and they're going on a journey. Because most Marvel, it's a joke within the community. Like, most of Marvel villains aren't that great. It's really about they focus more on their protagonist and like what the character is learning, and they're not always successful even at
Right.
that. But
Well, and I think the bigger issue,
you got to get one of these
Go ahead.
things right to kind of grab me. Go on, Jay.
well, and I think that's the issue is there's not one antagonist, there's three, and they all just kind of like Gary Oldman's character feels like, he's for what he's trying to do, what they're going for. He's interesting. I mean, he's this over the top evil CEO guy, and you know what I mean. He does a lot. Just when he's on screen, he's captivating, right? Like he kind of steals the scenes or whatever.
I enjoy watching.
The other two are just yes, I do too. The other two, like the alien little ugly guys, are just there for action sequences and to make action sequences happen. And then the big ball of death is literally just a ticking time bomb. It is not it has no persona. Or like it doesn't seem to like I guess Gary Oldman can talk to something that is in there or on I don't know. They really skip over the details, but it doesn't. I don't care about that. Like and it's like it's that kind of thing of like you only see it at the very beginning and like at the very end. Like that's the only.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, and I don't think you're really meant to even really care about that. It is totally. Like you said, I'm blanking on the term, but
a plot device. I don't.
Yeah. No, I think Zorg is our main bad guy, and I'll point out his right hand man, who's played by Tricky, one of the great trip hop artists of the '90s and 2000s.
Oh yes,
and I think. Yeah, Massive Attack, and I find him really compelling too. I mean, he's just got this very interesting face, and for a guy again who's sort of not attractive, he provides a compelling screen presence when he's there. I mean, not more visually. I mean, he's not a great actor. Don't get me wrong, but he's always sort of compelling when he's on the screen.
I think another thing for me then, again, you got to do one of these things right. So, yes, I agree with you. Gary Oldman's our real antagonist, but they take him out before you need to have him. You need to have him and the external force aligned. So again, I'm jumping to the end here, but they should also always have your hero kill the bad guy, and instead we had these other aliens kill him through a second bomb. It was funny, like it was 5 seconds.
Funny. It was
funny. It was funny.
Though, let me point out that the aliens like device that activated their bomb was literally like a locker, like high school locker, like like rotational like lock thing with just a red light in the middle. Like if you look at it, I was like, oh, that's literally just like a little dial thing. It was just funny. Sorry, that was
sure. I mean, like, but how much more impactful would the end of like it kind of slows down when they're trying to figure out what the elements are. How much more impactful would it have been if Gary Oldman's character was there too?
Agreed.
And he's trying to stop them as they're doing it, and the big ball of fire's coming. Like that, and then Bruce Willis gets to do something cool at the end to kill the bad guy. I mean, it's just like that's what kills me. It's like $90 million.
Yeah, but
and it took me 9 seconds. Like.
But you're missing the point, because here's what you said earlier. I wish I could rewind so I could quote you exactly. But you said something to the effect of you can't do that because the hero always has to confront the villain at the end of the movie.
I said,
right?
I think it's better. I think it's better.
So basically, what you're embracing, and I think this is what's kind of interesting, is you're basically saying the movie is better if it follows the exact formula of every other movie that does this, right? And I get what you're saying, because I teach screenwriting, and so I teach those kind of things. But the point is that, like you're talking about watching the movie as a well-crafted, they used to call it the well-crafted novel, the well-crafted
Sure.
story, right? That is this very structured movie that does all these proper things with the protagonist and antagonist to get you through a satisfying plot, right? This movie is not concerned with that kind of experience, right? It's not trying to bring you through the well-crafted movie and the satisfying plot of the good guy facing off with the bad guy at the end of the movie, which I agree. I teach that, right? I absolutely teach that, but that's not what this movie is trying to do. It's not concerned with that, right? It's concerned with the spectacle. It's not concerned with story. It's just using, obviously, I mean, it's got to be a little concerned with story, right? If we literally had no narrative, it would just be a bunch of random people running around, right? But that is secondary to the look and feel of the world, the comedy, right? All these other weird, fun, crazy things that are happening, especially once we get on the cruise ship, which is my favorite part of the movie. And
Cruise
all
ship
of the
is
stuff
by
on
far the best
yeah,
part of the movie. The cruise ship is like, well, that action sequence is a pretty good action sequence when he's running through and you get the debris. Like just visually, it's like, oh, it's a pretty good action sequence. And I get what
yeah,
you're saying, Bruce. I totally get that. I just keep going back to the thing I said earlier, where that if you don't have these things that traditionally we look at that we kind of associate, especially here in the States, whatever, with like good storytelling and we care about these characters and their motivations, all those kind of things. If you don't have those things, that's fine. But then you got to do those other things really well. Like the action isn't much better than any other action movie that's in the same time period. Like it's not doing these other things at such a high level that to me justifies its inability to do the basic stuff. You know what I'm saying? And
right. Yeah.
I get it. I say inability like it was they were trying and they failed. It feels like what kind of like what you're saying, that wasn't ever their intention, and I get that.
Right.
But
Right.
I just I
So
don't
I
know.
think to,
It's a
I think
it's a
in the
preference.
end, yeah, exactly. In the end, I think if that quirky, weird bizarreness resonates with you and you enjoy that and you enjoy being a part of that, you'll like the movie. And if it doesn't resonate with you, you probably won't. For me, there's just certain movies where I just like to be in the world of that movie.
Sure.
And the plot may not be that great. The Tron Legacy is a good example of that. It's not the same kind of movie as this, right? But it's a movie that the plot and some of that other stuff really isn't that great. But man, it's beautiful to look at. And I love spending an hour and 45 minutes inside that world,
Sure.
even if I don't really care that much about the characters, right? This is a different kind of world. That world is sleek and beautiful and amazing. And this world is funky and bubbly and weird and
Right.
but it's the same kind of experience, I think, where if you like being in that world, then the other stuff is sort of secondary for you, right?
Sure. And that's a valid argument, 100%. I do want to kind of get into because we're already running up on an hour on this. I do want to kind of
Yeah.
let's kind of track because there's 10 sequences. We've already kind of hit those first three or four where she basically she falls into the cab, right? Okay, let's
Yeah.
kind of track. That's why it's kind of hard though, because we are breaking this down on a script or on a script breakdown or just a movie breakdown kind of level. But the things that I want to criticize are apparently the things that it's not doesn't care about. So
Well,
we're gonna
let's just move. Let me just move us real quickly through sort of a couple of those things, right? And by the way, it does have that structure. But sometimes it kind of gets a little, it's like there's a sequence, but it's sort of not much happening, right? So I would say that sequence 3 basically kind of ends with Lilu sort of escaping and falling into Dallas's cab. Sequence 4 is about getting Lilu to safety. And by the way, we have another pretty nice action scene or sequence with the cabs and the police and the flying cars and all that. I think is well executed and is fun.
I do like the way the cabs look. I think that looks pretty slick.
Yeah, yeah. And the floating McDonald's and some of that kind of stuff I think is fun.
Hey Daniel, your
But
mic's out. Fun fact. Sorry, just noticed.
yeah.
You're still out. Sorry, everyone. but Daniel's out at the moment.
That just means we can talk even more.
That's true. That's true. And now Daniel's gone. Daniel said, "Fuck this
Daniel's
podcast."
gone, right?
I'm sure he'll be back any second. One thing I did notice, and I'm sure we're going to bring this up, is its treatment of like the female characters. Like all of them are presented in really scantily clad outfits. Daniel's joining us again.
Yeah. It is dated for sure in its
can't hear you,
portrayals.
Check 1, 2.
Oh, there you go.
There you go. Yeah.
There you go.
I agree completely with you, Donovan. It does sexualize its female characters. There's no doubt about that from a costuming point of view. Even Lilu is sexualized, even though I think she's a more interesting character, but she's really the only female character of note other than the diva, right? Who is in any way compelling other than just a two-dimensional,
My
looking at their body,
Diva,
right?
When she was dying, and then she like almost died, and Bruce Willis said something. She goes, "What?" I did think that was kind of brilliant. Anyway, but yeah, go on, Bruce. You're talking about
So they get away successfully, and he's able to get Lilu to Cornelius's apartment, right? And then again, another slightly cringeworthy in today's world where he makes a pass at her, tries to kiss her, and then she rejects him very violently. And I guess that's the good part, is he is acting like a fool, but she's not putting up with it. So I don't think we would have that scene at all in a movie now, but it definitely could have been worse, which we would have seen in earlier,
what
70s
makes
and
it
80s
even
movies.
a little worse is that he acknowledges that what he did was bad multiple times, and it's kind of like, it's like he knows he's not supposed to be doing this. Like he knows better, but he still does it anyway, which makes it even worse. But anyway, yes, go on. Yeah.
Although he then never does it again. But yes, I agree. It is somewhat problematic.
It's not working, Daniel. Sorry. I saw your sign language. Oh, he's gone again. We'll get him back, people. We know you care about Daniel's thoughts.
Well, just to kind of move us through, sequence 5 probably is the place where the movie feels where it feels a little unmoored. I would say that the goals in that are just all the parties trying to figure out what to do, right? And we cut around between almost everybody. We see Dallas on the phone with his old buddy Finger. The president's trying to figure out what to do. Zorg's doing stuff, but eventually they discover that the diva has the stones, and that's where the plot, I think, begins to lock in terms of a traditional plot a little bit more. The president tells General Monroe that he wants this done, undercover as quietly as possible, and so that's when Monroe goes and rigs the contest to get Dallas, and so we start seeing, I think, slightly more goal-driven sequences from here most of the way through the rest of the movie.
It says he was only...
By the way, am I working?
You are working, yeah. You are working. Okay, I went ahead and started talking. Like, maybe his mic's not working again, so I'm going to go ahead and talk. Real quick.
Well, I kept trying to talk for the last 10 minutes, and I was just like, man, these guys are just not letting me have room. I mean, fine, y'all take it.
Finally, I looked up and your mouth was moving and nothing was coming out. So.
Yeah.
You are a little low still, though. You are a little low.
Yeah, I'm in my AirPods. I'm not sure if there's much I can do about that, but I'll try to talk loudly.
I can hear you fine, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. It does get more goal oriented here, but it also, I think this is the part where the humor, I think it does come through and it works. I think sometimes, there's a moment. It's earlier on with Gary Oldman's character, and it's when Ian Holm he gets brought to him, which I think maybe Ian Holm's maybe the best performer in the whole movie. As far as a consistent performance, I think he's probably the best performance in the movie for me.
I agree.
But when he starts choking on the cherry or whatever, and the music does these like slapstick like musical note things, and it just I was just like, Why? Like honestly, it would have worked better if you just didn't have those in there. Like those cues just feel weird. But
And by the way, it's all happening in front of a little elephant creature, which is just so bizarre during that whole thing. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
He's like he's hitting the buttons and these random things keep happening. But I
Yeah.
actually do enjoy some of like it feels a little it almost feels like, Three Stooges humor here when we just
Yes.
like swapping out the passenger who's gonna go on the trip, like the general comes and then he shoves them in the freezer and then the other guy knocks him out. Ian Holm knocks him out and they take the tickets and then it's just and then by the time Dallas does get back up with Lilu by the end of it, and it's just and then you get all the people trying to come in as Dallas or Corbin Dallas or whatever. I think that stuff I did enjoy, and I think it did like the humor felt right in this world. Like it felt at home. Like it felt like, okay, this feels like what the movie's going for. The other moments, especially just the ones with the musical cues, like it just felt like I'm in Stuart Little or something all of a sudden, with these kind of musical cues or something where it just felt very random.
Well, I think that's the thing. I think I would enjoy this movie much more if they just went harder into those things. It felt like they had gotten this big $90 million budget, and so they almost felt required to have somewhat of a structure, or not structure, but somewhat of a story with action set pieces and all these other ththings. I would have liked it more if they just went just fucking nuts with it, like more nuts with it, and really, really leaned into it personally. But I think it's where, because it bounces back and forth a little bit between this zaniness, but then they're also trying to like have a seriousness with the plot. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah.
I totally agree with that. I mean, I definitely think it's not the most consistent movie on that level. But again, I guess sometimes, and again, it's probably personal taste in the end. Sometimes there's something charming about that, right? Where, for one thing, I don't think you could get away with that now. You know what I mean? Just because so much of it would be CGI instead of practical effects, and people would want to redo it. I mean, there's something, and I lament this a lot about, the world we live in now in terms of movies, is that, movies, especially during that 70s, 80s, 90s period, like they felt very handmade, and even for 1997, I mean, Jurassic Park's 4 or 5 years old at this point. This movie still feels very handheld or very handmade, you know what I mean? And so there is kind of a charm for me that it's not super consistent, which, yes, I also agree means you could say it's not as good a movie because of that. But sometimes things can be interesting because they're flawed, that they can kind of stand as this unique thing.
Agreed.
Because they don't quite all add up the way they ought to. And sometimes that's just fun, and sometimes I miss that in movies. It reminds me of some of John Carpenter's less well-known movies, his best movies are considered classics, but even his, like his Escape from New York and Escape from LA, I mean, those movies are cheesy as hell, right? I mean, they're completely ridiculous. And you kind of miss that a little bit, you miss that ridiculousness that we kind of have lost in movies. And I think for me, part of why I like some of that inconsistency is because it's unique and we don't get it. We just get bad movies or we get average movies. We don't get like, what the fuck is that movies, right? We don't get that very often anymore.
We need to break down Big Trouble in Little China. Because that's a fucking masterpiece, that movie is. That's an amazing movie. Yeah. I
get
what you're saying.
We ran through a couple of those sequences, right? So sequence 6 is like Monroe getting Dallas to go, and at the end of that sequence he agrees to go. Sequence 7, I mean, it's kind of funny because the whole goal is like to leave on the ship, and there's almost no conflict for Dallas and Lilu. The conflict is actually us watching all the other characters trying to get on the ship, right? Like it's very non-standard Hollywood, right? Because the protagonist goes through no conflict. Like the goal of a 10-minute sequence is to get on the ship, and he just does it. But we're watching all these other characters and all of this kind of comedy and slapstick as all these other characters show up at the ticket booth and are trying to get on the ship, and like you said, who's being replaced by who, and then Cornelius trying to sneak onto the ship, and all this kind of stuff, right? So it's not our typical plot. Yeah.
We do get probably one of the more interesting, maybe best, sex launch sequences ever. Like they do a great countdown, intercutting with dialogue, intercutting with Chris Tucker trying to fuck this lady. So like they did a pretty good job.
There's a lot of
cutting
intercutting.
Yeah, it's great. That's
They
great.
did it a couple times where it's like it's two different characters in two different places, but they're basically playing off each other's. Like I think they do it
Yes.
with Lilu and someone else at some point earlier in the film. But I thought that was. You're right. It was.
I dug it.
It was amazing in its own very unique way for sure.
Yeah, I agree.
And so then of course that introduces Ruby Rod, who I mean Chris Tucker just nails that performance. It's so amazing to me, and kind of ahead of his time because it's a very gender bending role. I mean, he is this super he's Chris Tucker. We know he's male, right? And he's this super sex symbol, but he's wearing this leopard print jumpsuit with flowers in his hair, and he's completely, and his voice is even higher than it normally is, and he's completely feminine in this certain way. And so to me, that whole thing is brilliant. I mean, his willingness to do that. And the way that all of that plays, and then how he becomes kind of, integral to what happens in terms of getting the stones, and that he somehow ends up, right? I mean, he ends up on the planet with them for the climax, which is completely unexpected that sort of the character who should be like the 15-minute comic sidekick never goes away, right? He just somehow stays with the movie the rest of the way, which is kind of ridiculous, but also kind of fun.
He was a little too much for me, but I have a special place in my heart for Rush Hour, so I allowed it. It's fine. Again, it is hard for me just because I'm looking at, okay, where's the plot pushing and what we learn about these characters, and we spent a lot of time doing this introduction with him, with his broadcast, right, and all this kind of things, which it is fun in its own way. But for me personally, I just have a hard time caring so much because it doesn't have anything to do with really what's happening with the. I don't really learn too much about Davis either.
It sacrifices plot, and to some extent, it sacrifices character for tone, atmosphere, comedy. I mean, and to me, there's so many great moments, and you're right, they've got nothing to do with anything, and you could cut them and you wouldn't miss them from the plot. So, one of my favorite little moments, and I don't know who the actress is, I feel like she's probably a famous supermodel or something, but when he is brought to his room and there's the cruise attendant woman who's showing him the stuff and showing him where the clothes are and telling him that he's got a front row seat to the opera. But then she's talking so monotone about all of this stuff, and then she's and then I forget exactly what leads it in, but she's and you've got seats in the front row with Ruby Rod. He's so hot, and she just completely goes into this different voice for 3 seconds, just out of the blue, and it just moments like that are just so much fun to me in that movie. And then, and then she's gone, right? And she doesn't show up. But yeah, and then of course we get the climax, which I sort of are equivalent to Act 3, right? Which is getting the stones, the attack from the aliens, Zorg showing up, escaping with the stones once he gets them from the diva, and then going back to Earth and putting all the elements in place to stop the black hole sun, right? Gets us into and.
I enjoyed this action sequence. I mean, the way it ended too, I was like, hell yeah, here we go. That's for me, for my bang for my buck, best part of the movie when he walks out of there, let me negotiate with this guy real quick, and he just walks in there, and the way it's shot and everything, like, yeah, that's good. That's good stuff for me, So I like that stuff. It's a great one
Yeah,
liner.
yeah,
I even liked how like the kind of the comedy with like him behind the bar and then Chris Tucker up above and he's trying to communicate with him
right.
and like he ends up literally seesawing him up into the roof, but I like all that stuff. That's fine. That was fun, and I
Yeah,
think because like that action wise, obviously they may have spent a lot of money on that part of the sequence, but like that was really good and like I wish we had more of that peppered throughout the movie, so like it's like this one moment of like, oh, that's good, I like that, but then it's like, oh, give us some more, give me some more of that type of thing.
yeah, yeah. And we do get some really good action, and then we're cutting to Lilu, who's trying to fight back and can't quite manage it. And what does she end up hiding in the ceiling? I can't quite remember what happens with her,
Yeah,
but
and Gary Oldman
um,
shows up and starts
Yeah.
shooting through the roof.
Well, she gets like shot
right,
in the
right,
ceiling. Yeah, she gets like
I was
shot.
under the
yeah,
impression that she was like basically matrixing, like absorbing martial arts and stuff. And maybe she did absorb it, but I guess she didn't absorb it that well. But like she was absorbing Bruce Lee,
Well, see, like she
you
had
know,
like super strength, maybe at
kind of,
times.
yeah. She
I mean,
punches the
like she
glass at one
broke that
point.
glass in the beginning, and then she was
Yeah.
like at least, I mean, this could have just been the choreography, but like very like lightly tapping these aliens, and then they would like fly backwards. So I thought
yeah.
maybe they were just
Well,
going for this kind of
yeah, I mean, and she has this big fight with the aliens, and she's successful, but then again, I don't quite remember. There's too many of them, and and she gets eventually she gets
yeah,
overpowered. Um,
yeah.
so um,
I
yeah,
do
and
I was gonna say I do like this message of like cigarettes are gonna kill you and like it's everywhere, but then it ends up being the one thing that saves them is the
I love
matches.
right,
how all
right,
the cigarettes
So
are
yeah,
I'm down for that kind
backwards
of
too.
stuff.
They're
Do what?
like if they're designed back, like the part that usually is like looks like the filter is on the like the part where they're lighting, and the part that usually looks like it's like they're smoking the white parts in their mouth, and the brown part is like what they're
Oh,
actually smoking
really?
on. It's just like
No, no,
flipped.
it's no. They smoke the brown part. It's that the filter is so long on the
Oh, okay,
cigarette
yeah,
that the idea is that you get a cigarette and you only get 3 puffs because the filter is gigantic
okay,
and the cigarette
okay.
is like this long. So yeah, it's actually a
It
nice
definitely
little
feels like
joke that
French
he's
commentary. French love
yeah.
cigarettes.
Um, and just a little more of some of the clever tie-ins that I think, I mean, they're not like amazing original, but just you had mentioned Zorg, and Zorg thinks he's got the stones earlier in the movie, and then he gets back to his office and he opens the box, and he sort of has this comic reaction, and then it happens again, right? He thinks he has them again, and he goes to his ship and he opens the box, and once again he doesn't have the stones, which is what causes him to go back onto the ship, and end up getting killed that way. But he plays that stuff really well, and it's a fun sort of echo of that
You know,
character. Um,
this is really just Infinity War is really just a remake of this movie because it's a bad guy looking for stones, trying to balance the universe. That's what it sounds like to me. But no,
A little bit, yeah.
I thought it was interesting that the stones were, inside her. It's like, man, these are some big ass stones, and like
Yeah,
yeah,
just like
she must have just
he
that
reaches into
species
the
of alien must
portal.
have tiny organs. That must be like the
Yeah,
lore of that. Yeah, and then
uh,
I think I do feel like we're kind of getting to like the final sequence. Or no, Bruce, was there anything else? I know you were pointing out some things you liked here.
no, I think that was it. Although I will say I've always been a huge fan of the opera scene as well, and sort of the traditional opera into the contemporary
Yeah,
singing, and the way she dances, is very fun. I will say, as much as I like that, that does sort of play into what Donovan's point, because the movie tries to set up that there's sort of this almost spiritual connection between Dallas and the singer, but it's
yeah,
very shallow. It doesn't really play, given the way the movie is set up. If this had been a more carefully structured movie, you could really see a potentially really compelling, even if it was short lived, relationship between those two characters. But yeah, I mean, it's sort of forcing the issue to try to make that happen in a movie like this. But yeah, other than that, we can move to the end.
Yeah, and I think I kind of feel like the movie has a bookends problem because I do feel like this last sequence is a little just it's kind of like cookie cutter in terms of like, oh, there's just one more thing keeps going wrong, or they have to figure one more thing out, and like we're literally I mean, it's like reminiscent of Star Wars with them cutting between people counting down and them trying to defeat the big ball of death.
Sure.
I think
And I
that's
do
okay,
feel like
actually. I think that's fine.
the last moment of tension is whether this match will be lit. Well, I guess that's one of the last moments of tension. Is this match is going to go out, and then we have. And I think you were saying that they try to make that connection between the diva and Dallas, and that's shallow. I think Bruce Willis's character is just pretty much shallow this whole film, right? Like
Sure.
even just
Yeah.
this last
Yeah.
moment where he's just like this whole movie, he's been like trying to fall in love with her and trying to get her to fall in love with him, and then she has to beg him to say that he loves her, which just feels like that doesn't feel consistent with who you've been up to this point or who she's been up to this point.
Sure.
And it's just, it's just very much like, I don't know this love. Show me this love. It just that I'm just like, I got my eyes were rolling heavily, back into my head at that point. I kind of wish we would have just somehow ended things like with because that was so boisterous and like there's so much going on, especially in the action sequence between Gary Oldman's character and the little piggy guys, and then Dallas and Lilu. And I just feel like it would have been nice to find a way to just end things with that momentum. I just think things kind of feel like they slow down again and get very Egyptian again, and that just feels a little anticlimactic versus where we were just previously.
That is a totally fair criticism. The main thing I'll say is that it's short.
True.
True. That scene where they're trying to do the stones, I mean, that's like 3 minutes, so it's not like they extended into some. I think they know too that the big climaxes have already happened and they want to add a little suspense, but they are smart in that sense that they move through it pretty fast. And the ray shoots up from the earth and blows up the black hole sun. So
yes,
as far as like mechanically, like what they have to do, the location, that stuff I'm okay with all that kind of stuff. I do agree with Daniel.
Yeah.
We do lose momentum, and there's even something where President Debo says, we won, but like before they got there or something. So it kind of like felt like either it was like out of order cut wise. I don't think it was that. It was just he made a statement of like we won because they had the stones essentially. And I get that he was like someone who didn't have all the information, but it just kind of felt like it like cooled down for a second, and then it got heated back up again. And where it should have been like they should have kept that kind of urgency throughout everybody's wherever they're at in the story, all the way to the end. But again, I just think it'd have been cooler if Gary Oldman was there with them, and I like them like lighting the match. That kind of reminds me of Executive Decision when he has the toothpick and he's trying to put the toothpick inside the bomb at the end, which I love that movie. But I think I like the spitting on one of them and blowing on the other. Like I don't know, I like that. That's fine with me.
Yeah.
But I agree. At the end there, it's very forced. And we're talking about the opera singer. Like Bruce actually does. When I was watching it, I was like, man, how did Bruce like get to that emotional place? Because he has like tears in his eyes. And I was like, I wonder if she was actually singing on stage when they filmed it, or if that was something they did, or if he just did it by himself. Like, because it's like OTS over her. You don't really see her singing, directly to him or anything. So I was like, oh, he actually cares about this, or he's getting moved by this opera singer. But then he's like lusting after Lilu the whole movie, and it's, and also I don't know. There's just something about her being like this character, and I could be wrong, and I could be saying something I'm not supposed to say. I don't know, but I feel like she's this character that's just like all looks in the beginning, and she just has a hard time speaking and communicating with people, and they're just all these guys are lusting after her, and I don't know. There's something about it just kind of grosses me out a little. I don't know. I don't know.
I agree. No, I think you're right. There's very much a sense that he falls for her primarily because she's a very much a typical damsel in distress. And in fact, she's so in distress that she can't even speak in proper sentences, right?
Right.
So yeah, I think that him falling in love with her, I mean, it's no different than most other Hollywood movies of the 80s and 90s, but I agree.
Sure.
It's problematic for sure from today's point of view. Um, and she is, they try to have it both ways, but I'll agree. I'm not sure that they really pull it off in the sense that she's this super vulnerable
Yeah.
character that needs to be cared for, but she's also supposed to be this kick-ass, amazing, person. And I'm not really sure that all of that lives together. I mean, she does as good a job with it as she can, I think,
Sure.
and there's no knock on her performance, but just, she's super kick-ass, and then the next moment she's crying, and, and it doesn't feel always very consistent from a character point of view. And she is a little bit of the, the stereotype now that we identify as the pixie manic dream girl,
Yeah.
who's a little quirky, a little funny, a little simple, but but also has a really good heart, So she is a cliche. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
I think
And
it would've worked a little
unfortunately,
bit
the movie
better.
like ends on that. The note that the movie, like the final scene, is just very like it leans hard into that stuff.
Yeah,
Especially with just like the scientist peeking in the window and then getting all stuttery because they're having, it just is all like, that part was just like okay, a little
yeah,
bit. I did like
yeah, and
though,
that,
and this is
yeah,
like a running joke with I think it was the president. It may have been Gary Oldman's character too. That like they would give these like you have 20 minutes, or like I think Gary Oldman said you have 1 hour on like a task that like literally it was like impossible to be completed like within
right,
that amount of time, and then it's never brought up again. Like it's never like he holds anyone to these numbers. It's just like you have 1 hour, like to like fly to this other planet and do all this other stuff or whatever. And it's just
right,
I did,
right,
and the president has a line there. He's like, I've got 17 other meetings today. He's like, and then like, he knew they need 5 minutes. He's like, they get 20 seconds. You know what I mean?
right,
That was,
yeah,
that was fun.
I think also maybe they felt the need to like have. I mean, obviously the end. They save the world because they fall in love, or he reveals his love to her. And I guess that if you could stick a arc onto Bruce Willis, it was like, will Bruce find love again? Because I think when he's in his apartment, is he married to somebody in the beginning? I think he even mentions
Divorce.
he was divorced or something like that. Okay, and he has this ridiculous mustache on him.
yeah.
In his badge photo, and also like in his ex-wife marriage photo. So I guess if you had an arc for Bruce, I guess it would be, will he find love again, or can he love again? Right? I guess that'd be it. Maybe.
Yeah, but in a way, Lilu almost has the stronger arc because, I think
Absolutely.
Lilu has doubts from the beginning as to whether this is all worth saving, because she learns like you said, she sort of matrixes, her knowledge of the world, and she sees all of this war, and she sees how terrible humanity is. And so, I think she's always conflicted about whether she's going to want to save the world. And, she has to sort of experience the love of one person to understand that, it's still worthwhile because of that. And again, that's kind of a cliche thing we see in Hollywood movies a lot, that
I don't think we needed her watching like footage of war on the way home though. Like that was where it was like, oh, like I feel like we could have maybe
yeah,
worked that in a little bit earlier, where it's like maybe show her reacting more like aghast to like the violence that's occurring to her and around her,
right,
100%.
right,
rather than it be like, all right, we're on the way home to save it. Oh shit! I just watched a documentary on World War II, and now I'm not so sure about this. Kind of thing.
Yeah.
well,
That
to
could kind of
push
end
back
too, like the
just
shot
a
and
little
stuff.
bit. Yeah, but I will say that in my mind, that very clearly to me is part of her reaction when she's fighting, and why she ends up crying in the ceiling is not just because like she's being defeated, but it's because of the violence that she's experiencing and seeing all these people trying to kill her and not fully comprehending why they would want to do that. You know what I mean? So I do think some of that's there, but by no means am I defending it as, some well-developed aspect of her personality or anything.
Well, Daniel said something right there that I feel like I brought it on. I think I've brought it up every podcast, the last 4 podcasts we've done, Daniel. But a lot of a lot of contemporary movies, specifically superhero movies, even Star Wars, they do this thing where they don't show the world reacting to the plot or the character going on. It's only whatever. I think it would have been done a lot of good to watch somebody, maybe it was poor or something, get killed for no reason other than being poor or something like that. Like seeing the world's reaction to the state of affair essentially, and then how that, like there's something, of course, she knows she's special. She even says, I'm like the ancient whatever. So she knows there's something people want with her in general, right? But like to see something happen to somebody who didn't deserve it at all or wasn't special, so to speak, that's more powerful. That's one thing, like, again, all these Marvel movies of like Justice League, Star Wars, all of them, they've been really guilty of lately is like, I know how these main characters feel, but I don't know how the people that they're trying to protect feel. And I think that's just as important.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. We did the Truman Show last time, and that actually is a big part of the Truman Show. And of course, it's built into the very conceit of the Truman Show, of it being a television show. But yeah, I mean, we see all of the viewers of the show and how they react to what's happening to Truman, and that it certainly makes it much more powerful emotionally when we get to the ending of that. Yeah. Also want to point out in some really film nerddom, by the way, with our Truman Show podcast, this year is I forget, 70 or 75th Cannes Film Festival, and their poster this year at Cannes was based on the Truman Show, and it shows him up against the wall opening the door, to leave the bubble. So I thought that was really cool that we did a podcast and then they made a poster based on our choice. So yeah.
I was going to say they clearly were influencing them as well.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, like overall, like again, there's things about it I enjoy, and like I love seeing like Bruce Willis be Bruce Willis in parts. And me and Bruce had this conversation before we started, Daniel, but like I think one interesting thing about Bruce's career is that he felt like he was never, or he never felt to me like he was scared to go do these kind of off-wall movies, and I'm not talking about the last 10-year B movies. I'm talking about like Death Becomes Her and 12 Monkeys, all these midnight, like he had success with a lot of Die Hard and Die Hard. I mean, all those movies. And he was at one point one of the biggest stars in the world, but like he was never afraid to do some weird stuff like this. And I think I'm glad it exists because of that, because I think it's like something you can go back and, especially during the time period. I mean, again, $90 million budget, late 90s for a movie that has like turtle aliens, like that is a cool thing to have,
I'll honestly say I think our discussion today has made me appreciate it more. Like I honestly feel like I wish I'd kind of been able to prep myself with the kind of like expectations of like European cinema. Don't worry about as much about the plot. Just look for the things it's trying to do well and kind of, enjoy those. And so I think I'm coming away from it with an appreciation of what it is and what it is doing and what it is trying to be. It's still not a movie that like I'm probably going to jump at the chance to see again, because I feel like it is kind of a movie, for me at least, that like once you've experienced it, that's what it doesn't feel very rewatchable for me in that sense of like, oh, that was a really interesting, like, down the rabbit hole kind of experience. I'm not like you, Bruce, who like fell in love with the world and just wants to live there necessarily like some other worlds. But I think it's a movie worth seeing at least once. I'll say that. I think it's a movie that, for all the things we've been talking about, all the things that it does do to subvert the tropes and subvert, what we typically think of with action, I think it's at least worth of like it's the exposure of what it's doing. I think because it is so unique, because
it really does stand alone in kind of a lot of those things. It's worth at least watching once.
Yeah, and I think it's weird because I think I'm not going to claim it as an important movie, but I think that in a world where our science fiction style movies are such big budgets, they're so polished, they're so corporate now because they're primarily all owned by Disney, right? I mean, between Marvel and the Star Wars universe, that's 60% or whatever of our science fiction right off the bat, because of that, I do think we sort of lose out on the quirkiness, on the rough edges, and even in Marvel, I mean, it's great that Taika Waititi makes, these fun Thor movies that have kind of some quirky humor to them, but they still get sanded down to fit into the template that Marvel needs it to fit into, right? So I do think that in the world we live in now, movies like that are important, but there's sort of this double-edged sword because I think for younger audiences, those movies are also harder to watch, right? Because they're used to this kind of polish. Watching a movie that's sort of not as polished and is more bizarre and quirky, and that's why it exists just to be that way, I think can be hard to watch, but I think they're also fun to watch. And I think, again, and not to say that this movie in and of itself is important, but I think that kind of movie is important. It's fun, and I think good to be reminded of that quirky cinema, that handmade cinema, that kind of exists for different reasons, and is playing with different things and sort of challenges you not to worry about plot and just to go along for a bizarre ride and get what you're going to get out of it, So I would agree with you, Daniel. I hope everybody watches the movie at least to get that experience of a different approach to it's a very generic story on one level, and then very bizarre and fun and quirky on another level, right? And I wish we still had
Presentation.
movies like that.
The presentation.
Even if they're not always the best, there's something fun, there's something different, and it breaks even, and I'm not saying they're not good, but there is a certain monotony now, right, to the kind of movies that we get at that level, right? And I think that's why I like this movie so much, because you can go into it and go, this is not what we're used to, and that's fun for a genre movie. So yeah.
What is your favorite sci-fi movie, Bruce? Or maybe it's one that pops out to you when you think about that question?
Gosh, I mean, I think part of that does depend on, I'm such a nerd, but there's subgenres of science fiction. There is kind of very, very action-oriented sci-fi, and then there's more cerebral sci-fi. That's a great question. The movies that are coming to me are a little bit more of the cerebral, quiet sci-fi movies. I don't know why they're coming to my mind, but I love Sunshine. It's one of my favorite sci-fi movies, directed by Daniel Boyle.
Amazing.
Very dramatic science fiction movie. Soft drama is Never Let Me Go. That's one of my favorite sci-fi movies. It's got Keira Knightley in it. It's directed by Mark Romanek. I love, although I was a little disappointed by Men, I love Alex Garland. I think everything that he's been doing up until Men is very interesting. So Ex Machina, I love Ex Machina.
Did he do
I loved it.
Annihilation?
He did do Annihilation, which,
Okay.
yeah, and Annihilation is definitely, again, it's nothing like The Fifth Element, but it's a bizarre, interesting movie. It's not your typical, it's sort of sci-fi horror, and
Sure.
Alex Garland sort of does a little bit of sci-fi horror. I think he wrote Sunshine as well. So he's collaborated with Danny Boyle before he was a director, he was a writer. I don't know why I'm blanking on kind of the bigger budget, sort of larger, because I love those too. I'm just blanking on what my favorites are in that realm. But
It's a hard question for sure. My mind kind of goes to the thing that kind of kept popping my. I mean, of course, there's Star Wars and all, but I don't really
Yeah,
consider. I mean, but I love Alien, like Alien One, and Aliens. Like I
sure.
love
Yeah,
those movies.
absolutely.
Holy
Yeah, I
shit,
love
I'm
those too.
obsessed with
Yeah,
those. And I love
yeah.
Predator, both those franchises. But I of course there's The Matrix, of course, that's sci-fi. But
Hmm. Yeah.
um, yeah, I mean I had to think about it too. It's one of the things I don't really think about too often. I'll tell you what my favorite sci-fi movies in the last 10, 15 years, and this is a big blockbuster movie, but Edge of Tomorrow. I love that movie with
Oh
Tom
yeah, Edge of
Cruise.
Tomorrow is super fun.
Oh,
Highly
amazing.
underrated when it came out. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
I love that movie.
Yeah.
And
Well,
anyway,
no. I'm
yeah.
sorry, Donovan. It's called Live, Die, Repeat. I
Yeah.
don't know if
Well,
you realize
not
that.
That's what it should
originally.
have been called. That's what it should have been called. And then they basically changed the name without changing the name.
They
Yeah,
did.
yeah,
Yeah, no,
exactly.
they did.
No, they
Yeah,
did.
which is really
It comes
funny.
out on. Yeah.
Yeah, Children of Men is probably, I would say,
Okay.
for in the 20th first century, the best science fiction movie. It might be one of the best science fiction movies ever made, but that's definitely more like serious, dramatic sci-fi versus big budget fun sci-fi.
And that one feels a
Yeah.
little more like dystopian more than sci-fi because it's not like too many years in the future. Like it's set in like 2020 or 2030 or something like that, I think in
Yeah,
the
yeah,
movie.
it's the
Um,
near future.
yeah. But no, I think that one's good. I think I really enjoy the sci-fi that is that I like action, but I really like the cerebral stuff, the stuff that's like I really liked Arrival was really good.
Hmm. Yeah,
I really
Fantastic
like
movie.
I know
yeah,
Interstellar. Not everyone loves that movie. I really enjoyed Interstellar. It gets a little
I do
mystical
too.
at the end, but I think it works on an emotional level for me. I really like sci-fi that is like kind of presenting these like existential issues of the human condition and how do we solve them if we have like a little bit better
right.
technology. So like Star Trek is like some of my favorite just in general sci-fi, on screen anywhere, at least
Yeah,
mostly the TV. I do like some of the movies. But yeah, I think the cerebral sci-fi, I mean, for me, that's just where the genre like is in its own skin a bit, where it just that
sure.
it can
Yeah,
do things there that like action sci-fi is really cool, but that could have been action in modern day and maybe not much was missing. You know what I mean?
right, right,
Versus like
right,
cerebral sci-fi, you can't just put that in modern day and it works. You know what I mean?
right.
Or make that a period piece and it works or something. So
Sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
I
agree.
I also love Terminator. Terminator 2 is one of the best things ever made. But I said last 10 years, I should have said this one, which you and me saw, Bruce. Blade Runner 2049. That movie. I love
Oh
that
yeah,
movie.
both
Holy
Blade
crap.
Runners are amazing. Yeah, I forgot about that. I love both of
the
Yeah.
the
new
Blade
Dune was
Runners.
great.
Yes. Holy crap. It's so
I have mixed feelings on the new Dune, and it's totally going to
really.
depend on part two for me.
We need
Yeah. I mean,
once part
it's
two is
half a
out,
movie
we'll
for
do a
sure.
double header like
Yeah, yeah,
review
yeah.
of the Dune movies or something.
If this one is like, there's certain things that Dune set up that I was expecting to be in the first one that weren't there, so I'm assuming they'll be in the second one. Primarily a lot more of Zendaya, and so if
Yeah.
the whole thing does what I'm hoping it'll do, then I think it's going to be fantastic. On the other hand, if part two doesn't sort of carry that through, then it's going to be really good looking and a little empty for me. So, but I'm super excited for the next one and to see what happens.
Last question before we get off. Were you a fan of the original
Yeah.
David Lynch version of Dune?
I love the original David Lynch
Really?
version, and I get why people why they don't like it. I mean, I understand it from a logical point of view, but I still love it. I still find it super original. The production design is crazy good. I mean, in some ways, it is a little like The Fifth Element, where it's sort of a little bizarre and clunky and kind of feels dated in a certain way, but still just I love it. So yeah, I watch that movie on a semi-regular basis as well, just because I think it's so crazy. But I also get why people don't like it. It's an acquired taste for sure. I have to say though, I have to add this little footnote. I saw that Dune in the movie theater when I was like 13 years old, and they handed out a glossary for the movie. They are not like they. It's like a one-page definition sheet of all of the stuff because they were so worried that nobody was going to be able to understand the movie. It's the only movie I've ever been to that they have given you written materials to go along with this. I'm curious, like, I have this memory very clearly, but of course it was a long time ago, and I've never heard anyone else like remember that, or so. I don't. Maybe it was a local thing, but I would love to find out if anyone else remembers that, because surely that would. It feels like something that would have come from the studio. You know what I mean? And they would have like sent these flyers to all the theaters. But I don't know if that's true. But I distinctly remember getting the definition sheet. Of course, I didn't need it because I was a huge fan of the books. I'd read them all. I was super nerdy and excited to see it. But anyway, yeah. That's
awesome.
My thoughts on Dune.
Daniel, how can our listeners write in to tell us if there was a glossary for Dune back in the day?
Our listeners can write into bit.ly/2for1mail. Let us know, is Bruce slowly going insane, or did this actually happen? bit.ly/2for1mail. Let us know, was there a glossary? No, this only applies to our older audience. So maybe Joel. I don't know how old Joel is, but maybe. If you were around then, if you weren't, then just maybe Google it and let us know. I don't want to.
Google it for me because I'm too lazy.
bit.ly/2for1.
And of course, if you can't hit up our Bitly, you can always leave a comment in the comment section below. YouTube.com/2for1studios. The best place to consume the content. Again, a like and a subscribe goes a long way. And if you want to bother Bruce some more, you can always find him at thehutchfiles.com or at BDHutch on Instagram. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep.
I have copied and pasted your information quite a few times, so
Awesome.
hopefully
well done.
I should
yes, you got it all. You've got it all. Just like how I know exactly when to say kapow. So
there, exactly. It's part of the thing.
So, right.
I mean, I want to love every movie that we do on here, and I really wish I liked this movie as much as you did, Bruce. But I am glad we did it. I'm glad I watched it again just so I can kind of cement how I feel about it. And I think what Daniel said too is like having talking about it and having listened to you about it, I do have a better appreciation for it than I did 2.5 hours ago. So
so are you saying you won't unfriend people if they like it now? Like, are you walking back that? Because this is important. I know Bruce isn't on Facebook, but he would be in your crosshairs right now if he was.
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
Well, that's why I felt okay putting it on there, because I knew Bruce didn't have Facebook, so I felt okay.
That's right.
I felt good about my decision earlier. So I thought it through, everyone. Anyway, thank you so much, Bruce, for being on. It's always a pleasure. I look forward to our next movie. We talked potentially about the Prestige. That could always change. I don't know, but whatever it is, I'm excited to do it for sure.
Me too. As always, it's great fun.
All right. My name is Donovan Thompson.
I am Daniel Wingfield.
And I'm Bruce Hutchinson.
And we have spoken.